Well, hello everyone and welcome, a very warm welcome to you from wherever you're dialing in from for this webinar. Today, we're looking at two topics in particular. The first being the National Health Security Resilience Assessment, which is still ongoing. And if your organisation hasn't yet completed that assessment, then hopefully today will help you to understand why that's really critical. And the second part of today's forum, really as a subset of that, is to look in some detail at the challenge posed by antimicrobial resistance and some of Australia's research and development capabilities in that regard. My name's Harry Baxter. I'm the Head of Government Relations for DMTC, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar today. We've also got four very distinguished panellists, and I'm grateful to them for their time. In just a moment, I will welcome each of those people in turn, and then we'll get underway. The format for today's session is pretty straightforward. We'll hear from each of the panelists for just a couple of minutes in terms of opening remarks. And then we'll come back to me to moderate some questions. If you have a question, can I encourage you to please submit it via the chat function, which should be just at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Before we get underway, and on behalf of DMTC as the host of this webinar, I do want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we live and work. Here at DMTC, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I want to pay my respects to them and pay my respects in particular to their elders past, present and emerging. DMTC acknowledges that sovereignty of this land has never been ceded. As this is a national event though, I'd also like to extend that acknowledgement and respect to traditional owners of country right across Australia, to their proud and continuing connection to land, waters and culture. And we do want to pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who might be joining us for this forum today. As I said, we've got four panellists for the session today. The first one is the man sitting to my immediate right. We do have masks. We have been socially distancing, so everything's all right. Dr. Lee Farrell is the Head of Health Security Systems Australia, which is a newly formed division of DMTC, and I'll leave Lee to explain that to you a little more in just a moment. We're also delighted to have with us Dr. Greg Coyer, who's the research leader for Chem Bio and Radiological Defence with the Defence Science and Technology Group. And we are grateful to Greg and thank him for his time today. We've also got with us Dr. Peter Thomas. Peter is the Executive Director of the Association of Australian Medical Research Institutes. And you'll hear more from Peter just in a few minutes' time. And last but by no means least, our colleague, Dr. Andrew Boskell, who is the Director of Stakeholder Engagement for Queensland at MTPConnect. But in relation to the topic of today's session, is also the co-chair of the Australian AMR network. Andrew, thanks for joining us and welcome to you. I'm going to hand over now to Lee to make some opening remarks, and then we'll go on to Greg, Peter and Andrew in that order. Thanks, Lee.
Thanks, Harry, and welcome everyone. Yes, I guess the opening remark that I would make is to reinforce the importance of medical research institutes to have representation of their capabilities in the National Health Security Resilience Assessment. There's currently some have completed that survey, but many have not. And so I think it's, and I'll get into this in the actual presentation, it's important that those capabilities are captured because government is waiting on the report that will be generated to drive policy decisions and also identify gaps as well. So I would encourage you to participate, but we'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. Thanks, Harry.
No worries. Greg, good afternoon and welcome to you. Can I invite you to just make some brief opening remarks?
Sure. Thank you, Harry. Thanks, everybody, for joining. In my couple of minutes, I'd just like to give you a little bit of a snapshot of what I do and my group. So I'm the research leader of Chemical, Biological, Radiological and Nuclear Defence down at Defence Science and Technology Group. And I have a group of about 70 people whose task it is to look at CBRN and methods of protection, detection, decontamination, and also look at medical countermeasures against those particular agents. The idea is to take technologies that are out there and put them in the hands of defence and national security personnel for their protection. Within Defence Science and Technology Group, we have what's known as a group purpose statement, and there's a lot of words in it, but essentially it's around defence shaping innovation in Australia, and also defence taking the technologies that are developed and put them in the hands of defence and national security personnel. I'm sure that you can look that up and there'll be more words around it, but that's essentially it. Look at the shaping within Australia and the translation of that technology, which is really important. Also, from a defence perspective, one of the main areas that we look at are the strong linkages that we have with international defence and national security communities. So my job is essentially to leverage what we have in Australia against those partner countries so that we can actually take intelligence, knowledge, technologies, and be able to leverage what else is out there in the international community and allow Australia to take advantage of that great breadth of knowledge that exists within US, the UK, Canada, and also New Zealand, depending on the communities that we work with. The most important community that we work with on that international front is what's known as the Chemical, Biological and Radiological Memorandum of Understanding, or CBRMOU, where we have a number of tasks that overlap the capabilities that we have in Australia and also the capabilities that exist in the Four Eyes partnership between the US, the UK and Canada and ourselves. Within that area, and I know we'll talk about AMR, Antimicrobial Resistance, but there is a task specifically under the medical countermeasures theme that looks at AMR and the effects of AMR. So that's purely a defence capability or community, but there's also other communities that we're building up. As an example, in the national security space, one of the areas that I'm trying to build up is what's known as what's coming across as a global biodefence network. Essentially, some work that started during the COVID crisis, where we brought together capabilities from around the 5 countries and looked at ways of looking at SARS-CoV-2 and how we can decontaminate more than anything in the first instance, and how we can go about coping with the spread of that particular virus. But that community will morph into something a little bit larger and looking at new types of diseases that may be circulating around the world. So as I mentioned, my task is to leverage our capabilities. So therefore, I need to know what the capabilities are within Australia. And so therefore, what Lee has described around the assessment is an important one for defence, and having that knowledge and being able to leverage against other countries' capabilities is really important. Harry, I'll pass back to you. Hope I haven't taken up too much of the time. Over.
Greg, thank you for that. That's very useful information, and it also takes away some of the things Lee was going to say later. So I'm grateful for you for cutting down on Lee's time. Peter, I'll throw to you now. Welcome, and I'll just invite you to make some brief opening remarks. Thanks.
Oh, thanks, Harry. I do appreciate that. And I did have a chuckle at the start when you described us all as distinguished. I think these passing 2 years have made me look more distinguished with the increasing grey hair I have now during this pandemic. But there we go. So who are we? We are the Association of Medical Research Institutes. We're the peak body that represents MRIs across Australia. And we have 58 members across the country, about 20,000 people undertaking about $2.1 billion of medical research each year, which is about 40% of all government-funded medical research. So our members are really important players in the medical research sector. So I was most alarmed when I had a conversation last week, I think with Lee, about the underrepresentation of MRIs in this process to date. So I'd really like to thank Lee, Harry and colleagues for reaching out and bringing us into this process, because we don't want to be left out of this important process. We don't want key capabilities being missed out, and crucially, we don't want our members being left out of future research opportunities in this area, particularly when our members are so exceptionally talented in these key areas. I think the key important point about a medical research institute is its focus is on medical research, improving health outcomes. We're not doing education. We're not doing a whole load of other disciplines. This is what we do. And because of that, and because of our size being about 200 to 800 FTE, we're very quick and nimble organizations. And you've seen that during the COVID-19 pandemic, when many of our members like the Doherty Institute, Burnett, Kirby, and so on, have just become household names as they're able to respond so quickly to what's going on around us. So we're very keen to help. And I really want to encourage all of our members and many are on this webinar, to participate in the survey and to work with AAMRI to have input into this process. So I think I might just end there. There's more I could probably say about what we're doing, but we'll probably get to that later on.
Peter, thanks very much for that. Andrew, I might come just to you now. Welcome, and I'll hand over to you for some remarks. Thanks.
Thanks, Harry, and hi everyone. So first, just to correct the record, I'm not a doctor. I'm one of the few non-doctors in MTPConnect, but I am a pharmacist, so medical background, clinician background, I guess. So yeah, I'm the director of stakeholder engagement for Queensland at MTPConnect, and for those unfamiliar with MTPConnect, we are the industry growth centre for the medtech, the biotech, and the pharmaceutical and digital health sector in Australia. And we work with stakeholders across the entire value chain to drive the rate of growth of the sector here. So we work to achieve 4 outcomes: to increase collaboration and commercialisation across the sector, to improve workforce and management skills, to improve access to global supply chains and international markets, and we work to optimise the regulatory environment. As Harry mentioned, I'm also the co-chair of the Australian Antimicrobial Resistance Network, or AAMRNet. And this is an industry-led multi-stakeholder network that brings together all the key stakeholders working to combat AMR as it relates to human health. It was established late last year and is operated by us at MTPConnect, and with the industry support of Pfizer, Ciro, MSD, GSK, Recce Pharmaceuticals, Botanix Pharmaceuticals, SpeedX, Medicines Australia, BioIntellect, and the Monash Centre to Impact AMR. So we're very grateful for their support. The network's undertaking a range of actions aligned with our key priorities, and these currently include we're scoping the establishment of an AMR accelerator in Australia. we're developing a report in collaboration with CSIRO on how we measure the real impact of AMR on mortality in Australia. I think this is a really important piece of work because, you know, often the stats don't reflect the impact of AMR, and you know, a lot of the stats that we see are around the impact of respiratory illness, for example, and there might be underlying cause of mortality that was actually a multi-resistant infection, but it's not captured as correctly or appropriately, we think. So I'm looking forward to seeing the results of that report. We've also established a working group on pricing and reimbursement, and that working group's exploring alternative ways to value and reimburse antimicrobials to overcome the current market failure for the products that we see. And we're also working to develop a report on the impact of AMR on Indigenous and remote populations. And we're currently working with DMTC and BioIntellect on this project. We are keen to conduct an audit of AMR, R&D and infrastructure capability in Australia. And this is a really important piece of work as it does a couple of things really. Firstly, it forms an important piece in relation to the AMR Accelerator Scoping Project, as it would help any accelerator identify and work with organisations that have quality AMR related projects and infrastructure. And it could also inform the national research agenda that the federal government has flagged that it wants to develop as part of the national strategy on AMR. So I'd encourage anyone on the call today who's working in the AMR space to reach out and get involved in the audit, complete the survey when it comes out, and share with people that you know are working in the space, as we're really keen to uncover as much as we can. We think it's a real opportunity to bring in investment from overseas to access infrastructure and expertise that we know we have here. We know there's a lot, we just need to uncover it. So thanks, Harry.
Andrew, thanks very much for that. I do apologise for introducing you incorrectly. I'd like to say that I'll have a go at the person who wrote my notes, but that would be like damaging my hand punching a mirror, so I'm not going to do that. Thanks for those comments. What I'm going to do now is throw back to Lee. Lee's got a couple of slides to work through before we get to questions. So Lee, over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Harry. And I'll move quickly through these slides. They will be available afterwards. So next slide, thanks. I just wanted to give a bit of an introduction to DMTC, what it does. This will be very quick. The vision really for us is to provide technology solutions and enable industry and academia and the whole ecosystem, to be honest, to enhance defence and national security capability. And Greg spoke to this earlier. We do this really by fostering collaboration. So we generate capability through collaboration. DMTC itself does not have research laboratories. What we do is we put together programs, be it for our defence customer or any of the other government stakeholders, and run those programs for them. So it's really critical, as you see, as we get into this National Health Security Resilience Assessment, that in our Rolodex, your names are represented. And I can tell you that programs that we've put together in the past for defence have drawn heavily on past audits that we've done. So next slide, thanks. The current programs that DMTC has range from air, land and maritime. And what happened really in 2005, the stakeholders of the program of DMTC saw that the model that DMTC was using could be leveraged to establish a medical countermeasures initiative. And that's what happened. That's been built upon, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The other thing that was done twice now, and 3 times now, I guess, there was a national capability audit looking at medical countermeasures capability. This was done in 2012, repeated in 2017, and our stakeholder group asked us to accelerate that in light of COVID. We'll talk about that. The other programs that we have, we build industrial capabilities. So we particularly in the manufacturing sectors, we're helping companies get Industry 4.0 ready, for example. And we also run sensing system programs, could be at high altitude sensors or sensors worn on the body. Thank you. Next slide. Greg spoke to this. We have a whole of government stakeholder group representing Defence, Home Affairs, Health, MTPConnect and NHSRA industry representatives, and we also have representation from DFAT. So these are at the level of Chief Medical Officer across each of those, or Surgeon General for Defence Force. Next, thank you. This is reiterating what Greg said, and I won't dwell on it, but it's important to note that the program that we run at DMTC through Health Security Systems Australia is plugged into that international network. So if you look at the top, that's the Medical Countermeasures Consortium that Greg spoke of. And really that's what stimulated the assessment in the first place that was done in 2012, because the question was, what capability and capacity does Australia have? And the answer was, it was a good question. So we thought we might answer it. And that's why these assessments have been done. And we also have international MCM stakeholders, not only in the US through BARDA and ASPA, but also in the UK, US and Canada, and Japan, I would say. But we can't execute any of this without you, which is down the bottom, whereas it should be up the top, because you're the great enablers of what we're trying to do, but you've got to be in it to win it. So next slide, thanks. In terms of the sectors covered by Health Security Systems Australia, it's across 6 sectors. This is including medical countermeasures, as you know, that's therapeutics, vaccines, and we define it as point of care diagnostics, but it also includes medical devices, could be medical monitors, it could be auto injectors and other such things. Hazard management, Greg spoke about this, the decontamination, area decontamination, personal decontamination, and so on. The other area that I know medical research institutes have a lot of expertise is in modelling and simulation. It's listed there, some of the program areas which we're currently operating. Sensing systems and wearable sensors. We just put out a request for information for human integrated sensing systems. This was for the operating in contaminated environment Starshot at DSTG. And we're also looking at personal protective equipment, and we've actually been involved in the discussion of mask design with the National Measurements Institute. Next slide, thank you. So I think it's probably self-evident what our objectives are is to build that sovereign industrial research capability aligned to national health security priorities, but it also helps us identify teams that we can draw on in the event of a major crisis. And I think what you saw at the start of COVID was a lot of busy work creating surveys and regenerating data that we already had. So what we've done now, previous audits were really collected on Excel spreadsheets, and then a publication was developed. This is a curated database now that is maintained as current always, and will be a tremendous resource for government and the response agencies that we report into. And as Greg said, finally, we can enhance our contributions in a more directed way with some of the global partnerships, particularly in the area of AMR and other priority infectious diseases. Next slide. So the National Health Security Resilience Assessment, we've spoken quite a bit about it. The sectors that are covered are shown on the next slide. So I'm not going to read all of that because it'll miraculously represent the same sectors that are covered by my division. So I'm not going to bore you stupid reading them, but it does build on the previous capability audits, but it's, as you can see, it's expanded in its scope. And this is really recognizing that you can't just drug your way out of a problem. Such as COVID, it requires an integrated response, and it can at times require innovation. This is why that's done that way. We're also looking at supply chain diversity, looking at number of suppliers for a particular, it could be an active ingredient, it could be an excipient, and we're also looking at the geography of suppliers, looking at things like supply chain risk, and also surveying the extent to which organisations had risk management plans, or did they actually pivot and adapt during COVID. And as I've already said, this informs Commonwealth policy to strengthen Australia's national health and security in general. So next slide. So this is really flowing on from what is already covered in the National Health Security Resilience Assessment. And this is around antimicrobial resistance. There are specific surveys in the NHSRA, as it's called, covering AMR. And I'm really keen to get those surveys populated as a matter of priority, but also to have the overall NHSRA completed. So this is the vision from Department of Health, Australia's 20-year vision for antimicrobial resistance. So the vision's a society in which antimicrobials are recognised and managed as a variable shared resource, and their efficacy is maintained so that the health of humans, animal, and the environment is protected now and into the future. So a One Health vision, if you will, and the goal is to minimise development and spread of antimicrobial resistance and ensure continued availability of such antimicrobials. This was off their website, and the link is shown there. Next slide, please. So the objectives that we've been set as a nation, I guess, is to have clear governance for antimicrobial resistance initiatives, covering both prevention and control of infections and spread, greater engagement to combat against resistance, appropriate usage and stewardship practices, and integrated surveillance. But it's number 6, which we have a role together in, which is the strong and collaborative research agenda across all of those sectors that I mentioned, and to strengthen global collaboration partnerships. So you can see a line with what DMTC is trying to achieve, and also Greg. So next slide, please. So the audit that MTPConnect has requested DMTC and BioIntellect undertake is to identify the R&D capability and infrastructure for novel and repurposed antimicrobials and associated technologies. That's point 1. And to identify strengths and weaknesses in R&D capability and infrastructure. And then to inform the operations of the I'm going to call it ARMNet because I'll just get tongue-tied, which is currently being scoped, and Andrew spoke about that and no doubt can speak about it a little bit more, and also to inform the development of the National AMR One Health Research and Development Agenda. And then, as I said, the NHSRA is a curated database, so we'll be updating that capability as it becomes available to us. Next slide, thank you. And I think now I throw back to my learned colleague, Harry.
Lee, thank you. Thanks for that. We've got about just a little bit more than half an hour for questions. So I will beg of my distinguished panellists that they keep their answers relatively brief. Lee, the first question is for you, and that is, what are for the organisations that complete the NHSRA surveys that are relevant to them, what are the next steps they can expect? And critically, when will the NHSRA be finished?
Yeah, so a couple of things. When someone asks me to do something, I always answer, is the juice worth the squeeze? And I think I've already given the message that government is sweating on the outcome of the report that we're going to issue, which will be in the first quarter of next year. So we really need to get that data from folks like yourselves locked, and so we can start analysing it. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you, Lee. Greg, I might come to you with this next question. I wonder if you can give us an example of some direct action that was taken as part of one of the predecessor audits that both you and Lee reflected on. So the last one was in 2017. We know that those audit information packets are still used even today, but I wonder if you can just reflect on something that's occurred because of the previous audit activity.
Sure. Thanks, Harry. And to some extent, everything that Lee described probably has started off from those particular audits. So, you know, the great example in the last few slides that Lee presented. For me, from a defence perspective, the work that we're doing under the Next Generation Technology Fund, the medical countermeasures theme that I lead around vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics is exactly coming out of those audits that have previously happened. And one thing that I'd like to highlight is, and Lee has said it along with others, and Felicia's on the line here, what we saw in previous audits was A-class facilities, but I think you put it, Lee, as B-class wiring. So those connections are the things that have probably come through since the last, and I'm hoping that this latest assessment shows that we are getting those connections happening. So that for me is an important one within Australia, and then of course internationally. Thanks, Harry.
Greg, thanks for that. Andrew, Lee reflected on some of the lessons that we might have learned from COVID-19 or some of the impacts of COVID-19. I wonder if you can share with us, perhaps from MTPConnect's perspective and even your personal perspective, how COVID has helped to shape the broader sector's understanding of a concept like supply chain resilience.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Harry, and it's quite complex. We actually released a couple of reports on this very issue, diving into it a bit deeper and the impact of the pandemic on our sector, because there certainly was a significant impact on the supply chain here. And I think there's a couple of different factors in play. And you know, we saw a bit of stockpiling from consumers and early on. You know, it was more than just toilet paper, it was antibiotics as well, and other sort of respiratory medicines, where there was a bit of stockpiling early, which put pressure on supply, led to an increase in medication shortages. I think, you know, from the big pharmaceutical and medtech companies, that you know, they had contingencies built in there that made them more resilient to these disruptions, and they had more capacity to absorb that increase in costs. But we surveyed people as part of our reports, and around half of the respondents indicated that their ability to maintain supply chain integrity was significantly impacted. I think it came down to not just finished products, but also critical input materials, and people were struggling to get hold of those input materials to incorporate into their manufacturing. It certainly demonstrated a need for more supply chain diversity. But there was opportunities as well. We saw increased demand for local contract manufacturers as well. So that diversity of the supply chain did create the opportunities. And it also highlighted gaps in our capability and our skills gaps as well, as around regulatory requirements, local regulatory requirements, as local companies pivoted to make things to help in the response to the pandemic. There was a real gap in knowledge around the TGA and the regulatory requirements. And to the TGA's credit, they worked really hard to increase. We collaborated with them on a number of occasions and different people to increase the knowledge base around regulatory requirements with the TGA. I think what we did see was, we've talked about it, Lee talked about it, MTPConnect talks about it, but collaboration really is the key to this. And I think that a real positive out of the pandemic was the increase in collaboration that we've seen and in our response, and the government recognised also the need to take action, and we saw the modern manufacturing strategy and the modern manufacturing initiative as the sort of flagship of the 2020 October budget, which had a supply chain resilience aspect to it as well.
Great, Andrew, thanks for that. Your point about supply chain integrity, I think, is a really interesting one. We might come back to that and discuss it in a bit more detail if we have time towards the end. Peter, I might just come to you if I can, given particularly your role, but in some senses, all of the panelists for today have got a vested interest, I suppose, in Australia's research and development capabilities. But I wonder if you could perhaps just reflect for us on the day-to-day work that your member organisations are involved in, and how important it is for their collective capacity and capabilities to be quantified in an assessment like this one.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. Our members do a full spectrum of medical research. They do laboratory research, discovery research, they do clinical research, they undertake public health research. So it's kind of full spectrum of research. So it's interesting to think about how this cuts across all these different areas. And when we're thinking about an antimicrobial strategy, I guess we're not just thinking about prescribing here, but we're thinking about how antimicrobials are used everywhere. And that's interesting from a medical research perspective, because we've got members, of course, who are undertaking clinical research directly on antimicrobials and making sure that we have the knowledge that we need to respond to these threats in the future. But there's also a lot of use of antimicrobials in lab experiments as well. So just other everyday lab experiments to prevent contamination and as a tool for molecular biology for selection and so on. So there's interesting how Australia's antimicrobial strategy in the future will cut across different areas, and it will affect how we do our research on a day-to-day basis. So just thinking a bit about the kind of usage, supply and disposal, and how changes in those areas would affect our day-to-day research. So it kind of cuts across a number of areas, I think. We certainly got a lot of expertise in this area. So I'm really keen for our members to participate in this process and make sure they make you aware of who they are. We do have a great degree of nimbleness and collaboration across our sector. So I think we've got a lot to offer there. You know, there's so many questions that I'd like to throw back to this panel, but I'll leave it to others to ask some of them first. So I'll just stop there.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for that. You can ask a question. I just won't promise to read it out. Lee, a quick question for you. One that's come in from one of our audience members today. So thanks for that. The question says, we filled in the surveys earlier this year, and so should we, or perhaps when should we update our entries? Can you just talk to that?
Yeah, so the idea is this is a curated and up-to-date database. So where circumstances changed or you've got new capabilities, we do want to know about it. And so we would like to see that updated. And what I would suggest for those organisations that have completed it and want to add something more, contact us and I'll get one of my folks to speak to you and help you update your details. Thanks, Harry. Thanks.
Andrew, I might come back to you, given that we are focusing today a little bit on AMR as a discrete topic within the NHSRA. At the announcement of the network, which you are the co-chair of, our friend and colleague Dan Grant highlighted that the need for new treatments was urgent, and he said that the new network recognised the need to incentivise and mobilise R&D in Australia, particularly around antibiotics. So I guess my question for you is, how's that going so far, and what is actually happening to mobilise and incentivise those research in those areas?
Yeah, it is a really important area. I think you know, we know about this broken market for novel antimicrobials, and there's a lot of things going on that are causing that. The nature of an antibiotic is, you know, we don't want to use it until we have to, right? But we want it to be available when we need it, and so the sort of pay as you go model that has characterized all reimbursement really for drugs through the PBS anyway is just not working, and you know, it's creating this environment where it's still costing over $1 billion to bring a drug to market, but the revenue people are getting from an antimicrobial just isn't enough. It's not even enough to meet the post-market costs of, you know, I think they're about 300 million a year. So I think, you know, it is a priority for the network, and we have, as I mentioned earlier, we've formed this working group to assess what's going on overseas, to look at what we can do to make something fit for Australia, and that's what we're working on at the moment. We're seeing action across the world. You know, the UK are piloting a de-linked model that de-linked it de-links payments from volume. So that they're the nice NHS model. They're trialing one. Sweden have got one that they're utilising, and I think that they've seen an increased number of antimicrobials registered and reimbursed in Sweden as a result of their proposal, and the US is looking at the Pasteur Act, which is another market incentive. They talk about push and pull incentives, and you know, a lot of the focus has been on push incentives, which are really important to drive earlier stage research, but you still need the pull incentive to bring them to market. And with that pull incentive, I think that there will be this creating a sustainable market will certainly shape the whole R&D pipeline for antimicrobials. So it is an interest in as Lee pointed out, in the national strategy that the government is looking at it. We're expecting a consultation on that. We know Department of Health are looking into models that could potentially work for Australia, and we're expecting a consultation out on that in the near future. So the network is engaging really closely with the department on all sorts of different things around AMR. So it's, yeah, progress. It's a long, you know, we're in the long game here, aren't we, Harry? But it's you know, progress is being made for sure.
That's great to hear, Andrew. Thanks for that. I've got a question that I might throw first to Greg, but I know that Dr. Farrell here on my right will also want to take a bite out of as well. So Greg, this question I'm assuming is in relation to some of the countermeasures work particularly. And the question is, do we have priority pathogens in mind, noting that some evidently pose a bigger threat than others? I wonder if you can speak to that from your specific context, and then I'll ask Lee to make a comment as well.
Yeah, thanks, Harry. Very limited what I can say in terms of which particular ones, but I can answer the question by saying yes, there are priority pathogens, and I'm sure that people in this particular webinar would know which ones we would be targeting. I might have to pass that one on to Lee for more a wider health space.
Yeah. I think the answer is there is a list of priority pathogens, but also building the priority with which we're going to address them, and you will see that in the coming months as we're establishing new programs in some of those areas. So I think what I think would be useful moving forward, given the productive discussion we're having today, is as we do new calls, I suggest we do a briefing again for the MRIs specifically, and not use a scattergun approach and pray that you're all seeing it. I think this is a good forum to do that and start building up a community approach to this better than we've done in the past. So I'm going to take that as an undertaking.
All right, thanks, Lee. Thanks, Greg. Greg, I might come back to you again, but I'll also invite the other panelists to chip in with this one. We often hear the phrase, never waste a crisis, when it comes to pivotal moments in a nation's history or economy or even security. So I wonder what you think we can, and we are now talking about Australia, what Australia can learn from COVID to apply to either future pandemics or indeed to the AMR challenge, so that we ensure that we don't waste a crisis.
We're testing the fire and evacuation alarm system in the SPES building.
Can you take us on?
Please ignore the following tones. They are for testing purposes only. There is no need for action. Thank you.
Okay, Harry's gone on to mute, so I'll answer the question around never waste a crisis, and hopefully by the time I finish speaking, they would have finished their testing. I guess it has been something that I've sort of reflected on, and I guess in my mind, it's been a case of a pandemic needs the development of a vaccine, but if you think about it the other way, the development of a vaccine needs a pandemic. And I say that because I think the technologies that have come out that we've seen around mRNA vaccines, around encapsulation of those particular vaccines, for me has been something that's been accelerated probably 10 years down the track. I never thought that we would have mRNA vaccines in the arms of individuals today, a long way down the track. And that's been not just because of that technology acceleration, but it's also been through the speed of approvals. And I think Andrew mentioned earlier on the TGA's agility. So these are all changes that we really need to take advantage of going forward. You've seen modelling being spoken about, probably around the kitchen table, something that people probably have ignored in the past. So the use of that modelling in this particular pandemic has been eye-opening and certainly different. So those new technologies, even rapid testing now, I mean, we're talking about potentially having rapid testing in home, which is probably something that even the TGA probably wouldn't have even thought about. And for me, the really big thing, and it goes back to that wiring comment I made a little while ago around the formation of partnerships, the formation of those particular linkages within Australia. I'm hoping that we can continue that as well as international linkages so that we are prepared and ready to go should another pandemic emerge into the future. So that's where I think we can't waste some of these opportunities that have come our way. Hopefully back to you now, Harry.
Thanks, Greg, and I do apologise for that. It just shows you should always be prepared for a crisis. Andrew, over to you to see if you have anything to add for that question.
Yeah, look, it is important not to waste it, and I've seen real positive things happen as has been mentioned, and I mean, I talked about it before, but the amount of collaboration that's happened as a result of this has been amazing. I think the other thing that is notable that I've seen is the link between health and a healthy population and the economic status of a country, which, for so long health, and it's all seen as a cost to the budget. It's all a cost, right? But now we're seeing that, I've used this quite a bit, but Catherine Murphy from The Guardian on I think it was the first episode of Insiders this year said what we've learned out of COVID is that the best economic response has been the best public health response. And I think that link between between health and the health of the economy has been really key, and a key learning from the pandemic for sure. And we can't let that link go. We still have to maintain that. So hang on a sec, investing in health and medical research is an investment in the people and the economy as well. So yeah, that would be my sort of thing around this.
Thanks, Andrew. And I can confirm for everyone listening that the fire alarm is plenty loud enough. Lee, can I go to you in relation to that kind of theme about never wasting a crisis?
Yeah, I think the thing that, and people have spoken about it, is the collaboration, but I think it was also the directed collaboration and doing it in a global context. So we saw, it's been talked about for a long time about having master protocols, for example, for clinical trials. I think people saw the great benefit of that with the ability to pool data, do meta-analyses rapidly. But I think the other thing that you saw, and it's something that's used in defence, it's called OODA loop. We call it Agile Project Management. And that was rapid adaptation to new data coming in. And that was not just on the drug development or vaccine development side. It was also on the side of controlling our borders, for example. So it required agility from the ACCC to allow pharmaceutical companies to sit down at the table and talk about supply chain in a way that has not been possible before. And so I think these will have permanent ramifications for our preparedness, prevention, response and recovery plans for the country.
Lee, thank you. Peter, can I just check in with you? Did you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, just a couple of things. I think that what we'd learned from COVID is that we can respond quickly to a crisis, and we should apply those lessons learned to other areas of medical research. And just thinking about how we fund medical research, we get our researchers to write a grant application, which can take 3 to 6 months, and then it takes another 10 months for that application to be assessed, and then another few months before funding begins. And that cycle, it takes an awful long time, and it's just not appropriate for dealing with a crisis. And I'd say that antimicrobial resistance is a crisis right now, and we need to treat it with the same level of intensity and seriousness that we have with COVID-19 before it really comes to bite us. So I think that finding more rapid ways to get research underway, which we've done in COVID, and then applying that to other areas. And we've got opportunities through the Medical Research Future Fund and elsewhere. And I think the other point I'd make, I think it's been touched upon, but we've got governments now in Australia and around the world, I think, who really value medical research and can see its links to health outcomes and economic outcomes. So now is the time for us to collectively make that case, and but in other areas, other disease areas too, such as antimicrobial resistance.
Peter, thanks for that. And I think that's a terrific point that you make about the sense of urgency more broadly with some of these things. Hopefully, that is one of the enduring legacies of COVID. Could I perhaps, Peter, come back to you just in the last couple of minutes we've got left? And again, because the focus of today was very much about AMR, one of the issues that was raised in Australia's national AMR strategy, which is the document that Lee referred to earlier, was in relation to standardizing antimicrobial susceptibility testing practices in laboratories across Australia. I just wonder if that specifically is an issue perhaps for your members and that you'd like to touch on, and then I'll go to Andrew to see if he's got any comments on that. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I haven't surveyed our members on this, so I can't really respond with a sector view, but I think it's likely an issue. But what I can do is go away and do that work and get back to you on that. So, and that's really what AAMRI is for, is to just collate those sector views. And so I'm sorry I can't answer that one directly, but I will commit to working with our members to give you a response to that.
No problem at all. Andrew?
Sorry, Harry, I missed that one. It was breaking up. a bit.
I was just, the question was around the National AMR strategy, the document that Lee referred to earlier.
Yeah.
There was some commentary in it about standardizing antimicrobial susceptibility testing in laboratory practices across Australia. And I just wondered if that's an issue that you were aware of or that you wanted to comment on.
Yeah, no, look, I'm not in a position to comment on that just at the minute either, Harry, sorry.
No problem. All good. That's what question and answer sessions are for. Conscious that we're getting close to the end of our time together, I might just perhaps ask Lee to wrap up and then I'll come back and give a note of thanks for our panelists. Lee.
Thanks, Harry. Just one final point that I'd make, and it was in relation to priorities. So there's AMR is one of those priorities. But the way we run this at DMTC oftentimes is we'll put out a request for information where we're actually scoping what a project will look like based on the expertise. So people will come into an invited discussions in response to their RFI submission. And what happens there is we conceptualize larger programs. So people that may not have worked together before become part of a bigger program. And I suggest that would be a terrific forum for MRIs to participate in as we move forward. But as I said, to be included in that discussion, we really need your data. So if you haven't already, please complete the National Health Security Resilience Assessment. And as reflected in today's discussion about AMR, make sure that you get all of your capabilities and capacities in that survey so we can do an accurate report for government. Thank you, Harry.
Thanks, Lee. Just going around quickly, Greg, any final comments from you?
No, I'm good. No final comments, although there is an answer in the chat about standardized testing. I'm hoping everybody noted.
Yeah, terrific.
Thanks.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Andrew?
No further comment from me. Thanks, Harry. Just encourage everyone to, like you say, do the survey and share it wide, so as many people can complete the survey and we can get as much info as possible. Thank you very much.
Great. And Peter, any final comments from you?
Just reiterating what you said, please fill in the survey, and if you want to get in touch to discuss this further, drop me an email and I can put you in touch with Lee and Greg to discuss further.
All right, well, thanks very much to all of our panelists. Thanks to Dr. Lee Farrell, to Dr. Greg Coyer, to Mr. Andrew Boskell, and to Dr. Peter Thomas. It's been a really helpful session, I think. Thanks to everyone who's participated and asked questions. We've got some information that's in the chat about how organisations can contribute to the survey, and you can also use the QR code that you should see on your screen just now. It's been, again, our pleasure to host this webinar, so thanks for your involvement. Have a great day, and please, if you haven't already, go and get vaccinated. Thanks, everyone.